Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on this motion, what we're before the House today to do is to listen to the government and its request for an extension of the state of emergency that has been declared for an additional period of 3 months. So therefore, Mr. Speaker, the first thing and predominant thing that must be addressed is whether there is justification for such an extension. The declaration of the state of emergency was made, and in the previous motion we dealt with the reasons for the calling of the state of the emergency. Her Excellency the President, in accordance with the Constitution, sent forth the reasons. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition, the Honourable Member for Arima, immediately indicated the Opposition's position, that having seen, having read the reasons from the President for the calling and the declaration of a state of emergency, the Opposition was prepared to support it. But what we need to hear now as a population, and not only us in this House, because we represent persons, the population, is justification for an extension for 3 months. We've heard about plots. We've heard about a host of very, very serious instances of criminal activity, which, quite frankly, we have no reason to doubt on this side, because not too long ago, it was us on this side, and I served on the National Security Council from the first day in 2015 until April 2025. So I am very aware of some of the instances to which we've heard reference by the Attorney General, including the ills of the prison service. But what we need to hear here today, and quite frankly we haven't heard, is how does a state of emergency for the next 3 months justify, and how is that state of emergency extended for the next 3 months going to deal with the specific ills that have been listed? You see, Mr. Speaker, as many of us in this chamber would be aware, having practiced law, a state of emergency is a very, very serious incident. The calling of a state of emergency, respectfully, is a mission of last resort. It is our proposition that one should never, as a first instance in dealing with crime and criminality, rush to a state of emergency, because there's nothing left after that. And in fact, it would start. So a state of emergency called after 9 years of governance is very, very different to a state of emergency called within 3 months of being in government. So what we must do here today, Mr. Speaker, is examine the effect of extending the state of emergency. Because you see, the state of emergency, no matter how there are attempts to dress it up, does not only affect the lives of the criminal element. The state of emergency is a suspension of every citizen's constitutional rights in Trinidad and Tobago. And that is a very, very serious matter. The suspension of our constitutional rights, our rights that are enshrined and protected by the Constitution. And we can see this by immediately going. We must examine the regulations. The regulations are what give effect. The Emergency Power Regulations 2025 are, in fact, in accordance with the Constitution and Section 7, what give effect and what give the powers to a state of emergency. And the population would do well to know that these regulations, like previous regulations, I remember here in January of this year, the Honourable Member who's now left for Barataria Sawa took us through a treatise of going through the regulations and talked about cut and paste and these types of things. Ironically, the regulations that govern today the state of emergency 2025, declared on the 18th of July, are cut and paste as well. And that is not surprising. And it is not my intention to criticize it, because I understand the importance. But what I am concerned about, Mr. Speaker, is the powers under these regulations. And how do those powers affect the lives of every single citizen of Trinidad and Tobago? Be it my constituents in Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West, be it the constituents of the Honourable Prime Minister in Superior, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition in Arima, because every citizen's rights right now, constitutionally, are suspended. And we can very quickly look at Section 4 of the Constitution, where our enshrined rights are, Mr. Speaker. And we see the right of individuals to security of the person and enjoyment of property. These regulations affect persons' rights to property, because these regulations give not only the police, but they give members of the defense force the powers to stop any single citizen, to seize any item, not only firearms, any item that they reasonably believe can be used to commit a crime. Those are very, very serious suspensions. Also, the right of the individual, still under Section 4, to freedom of movement. Because under these regulations and the current state of emergency, you can be stopped by a police officer and a member of the defense force anywhere throughout Trinidad and Tobago. And that is a very serious power that we've given. One of the most fundamental powers, or rights, that have now been suspended and are traditionally suspended by states of emergency declared in circumstances such as this. Because this is not like the state of emergency that existed when we were dealing with COVID. This is specifically to deal with crime and criminality, as we've heard this afternoon, and we've heard in the last 10 days, is the right of a person to bail, and the right of a person that is enshrined under Section 5, 2C of the Constitution. The right that you cannot deprive a person who has been arrested or detained to be brought promptly before the court on appropriate judicial authority, or 4 of the remedy of habeas corpus. This also, Section 5, gives you the right to apply for bail. But under the state of emergency, and in particular the one that we're being asked to extend today for a period of 3 months, you no longer have the right to bail or the right to habeas corpus, as per the regulations. So turning very quickly to the regulations and why we are concerned on this side, that by the extension we're granting a continued suspension of constitutional rights. Very briefly, we see that these regulations were produced. And if you look at Regulation 4 and Regulation 3, it allows particular orders to be made. Orders that authorize the search of persons and premises, the seizure of anything, its detention for so long as may be necessary for the purposes of examination, investigation, trial, or inquiry, authorizing the interrogation of computers, electronic devices seized under the paragraph. And we must question, if we're going to grant an extension of the suspension of our constitutional rights for the next 3 months, what is it that the current laws that are in place, why is it that the current laws that are on the books, which are extremely extensive, one only needs to look at the anti-gang legislation, look at the Interception of Communication Act that has been amended to deal with the ills of the prison service. And ironically, the same complaint that was made by the Attorney General of attorneys and some attorneys finding themselves in cahoots with criminals who are incarcerated in our prisons, the amendments to IOCA that were resisted, IOCA being the Interception of Communications Act, that were resisted by those on the other side, deal specifically with some of those ills, making it criminal offense for those types of interactions and for attorneys to be in cahoots with the criminals. So it is not a new phenomenon. Unfortunately, there are corrupt people in the system. Corrupt people who are taking contraband into the prisons. We heard it. We heard the evidence today. We've seen it in the public domain. Since the declaration of this state of emergency and raids that were carried out as the state of emergency was declared at 6 a.m. that morning of the 18th of July, within a matter of days, there were phone devices back in the prison system, despite us being in a state of emergency. So what is it that this state of emergency that suspends, Mr. Speaker, your constitutional rights, my constitutional rights, the opposition leader's constitutional rights, the Honorable Prime Minister's constitutional rights, for another 3 months? What is the magic that is going to be deployed by the government to stop these ills? We haven't heard a single one. And I can stand there, Mr. Speaker, and say without fear of contradiction that this opposition will always support the law enforcement. And if that is what the government is doing, as we heard them say a short while ago, providing support, i.e. resources, to law enforcement to stand and to face the criminals and to fight crime, we stand with that. But, Mr. Speaker, it is our duty as well to ask the question, how does an extension for the next 3 months of a suspension of rights, a suspension as we see per these regulations, giving police and the defense force, as per Regulation 9, the power to stop and search any person whom he finds in any street or any other public place reasonably suspects of having any firearm, ammunition, or explosive in his possession, contrary to Regulation 8, or having committed or being about to commit any other offense prejudicial to public safety or order. And it's the last part that expands it beyond the Firearms Act. Because it was not too long ago in January, the Honourable Member for Barataria took us front on treatise of what is the difference with the Firearms Act, and these same regulations. But it is that last part of the clause. We are empowering the police and the defense force, suspending constitutional rights here. And you're giving further at Regulation 11, it says, no person shall A, endeavor whether orally or otherwise to influence public opinion in a manner likely to be prejudicial to public safety, or B, do any act or have any article in his possession with a view to making or facilitating the making of any such endeavor. That captures phones. That captures everybody's smartphone. Because now on a smartphone, it is a platform. It is a platform that people are using to influence public opinion. So these are very, very serious rights we're suspending, very serious powers we're granting for the next 3 months is what we're being asked to do. How does this affect? How does it stop? How does it fix? Because that's the catchword we've heard for the last few months. It fixes everything. How does this state of emergency now fix the ills that we've come here and we've been hearing about? The ills that a commissioner of police told us about on the 18th of July. You look at Regulation 12. This is one of the most offensive potentially. Notwithstanding any rule of law to the contrary, a police officer may, and of course under these regulations, police officer now includes a member of the defense force, may without warrant and with or without assistance and with the use of force if necessary, enter and search any premises or stop and search any vessel, vehicle, or individual, whether in a public place or not. So there is absolutely no argument that could be made against this being utilized against the criminal element, you know. I doubt there is a single member in the 41 members, some of whom are not present here today, who would not agree that police should have the ability to go into a criminal's residence. But who determines that? And to stop and search anyone, anywhere, who they believe is a criminal. That is why the law outside of a state of emergency and the Constitution in enshrined rights protects all of us from the potential of abuse. So that is one of the things we're putting on notice here today. We are concerned, and we're just putting down a marker. If this is extended for another 3 months, that there should not be an abuse. And immediately, one of the things that comes to mind, Mr. Speaker, is last week, a big part of the public debate, or the evidence in the public last week, was unfortunately, there were 5 incidents of our Trinidad and Tobago Police Service carrying out their duties, we trust lawfully, engaging in and killing who were told are criminal elements. We are not criticizing it, but it is something to be cautious about. Because in a state of emergency, our rights are suspended. In a state of emergency, as the Honourable Member for Tunapuna would be able to give personal attestation to, having come from the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, a police officer can just stop anyone. You don't even have a right to ask, well, show me your warrant, show me that you identify yourself. And you can then be detained, and detention orders can be produced. These are some of the very serious powers that are granted in a state of emergency. So you can enter and search any premises or stop and search any vessel, vehicle, or individual, whether in a public place or not. Those are very serious powers, and we must give serious consideration here today, Mr. Speaker, to what is the task that is currently before us. This is not about flippancy. This is not about talks about partying and etc. This is about what is the justification to continue the suspension of persons' constitutional rights, every citizen's constitutional rights, in this manner for the next 3 months. And of course, under a state of emergency, there's the power to detain and to take to places that have been determined for detention. And we've heard on the morning of the 18th of July that certain persons were taken and to other places outside of the normal prison system. And we can only assume on this side that there was justification for that, because of the serious potential incidents that we've been told about. Mostly by the Commissioner of Police. Because any plot to destabilize Trinidad and Tobago is something that we will not associate with on this side. But that is not something that should be thrown around lightly. Unfortunately, in the past, we've learned from past incidents that can arise. It was on this occasion, Mr. Speaker, that we, the population, we woke up on the morning of the 18th to see it circulating that it's possible we were under a state of emergency. The first person to address the population, the nation, on this was the Commissioner of Police. The Commissioner of Police's role is only to recommend. It is a governmental decision. It is a cabinet decision. It is the Prime Minister's decision, along with her cabinet, to decide and to advise Her Excellency the President, pursuant to the Constitution, to declare a state of emergency. So it was quite ironic a short while ago to hear from the previous speaker, when you're bold enough to call a state of emergency, find yourself in front of the population. Immediately my mind, and as I'm sure the population's, was triggered to the 18th of July. The first thing that came out was a statement from the Commissioner of Police, not a part of the executive. The second thing was by 9 a.m., a press conference by the Commissioner of Police, where he said a number of things very, very carefully. We heard an Attorney General here today tell us that his statement was vetted by the Commissioner of Police because of concerns not to jeopardize ongoing operations, intelligence, not to expose potential confidential informants. Very sensible. But it was not for a Commissioner of Police in these circumstances to address us. Very belatedly, there was a press conference later on that day by the Attorney General. There were a number of contradictions, and later on came a statement from the Prime Minister. So where is it that you are bold enough to find yourself in front of the population? One of the most stark contradictions that we picked up on the 18th was the Commissioner of Police, when asked questions by the media, specifically stated no politician's life was under threat. He was asked specifically about that. And the Commissioner of Police, who is being pushed out in front by the government, said very clearly to the population, no politician's life was under threat. Contradict that to what we heard later on in the afternoon about rocket-propelled grenades taking out buildings. And not even what we've heard today. Today, I made a careful note again that it was said how politicians were under threat. So when we're taking this serious decision for an extension now, for the next 3 months, we need full and frank disclosure of what can be said. We accept that in the circumstances when it deals with national security, specifics can't be given. But 1990, even what happened in December 2024, is absolutely no justification today when a decision is being taken for an extension of a state of emergency. The test, Mr. Speaker, is what are the circumstances existing today, at this moment, and how will the extension of this state of emergency, that is a suspension of every citizen's rights, constitutional rights, or enshrined rights, or freedom of movement, or right to bail, applications for bail, or rights to applications for habeas corpus, that we are suspending those for the next 3 months. The regulation set up, as per the constitutional requirement, a tribunal appointed by the Honorable Chief Justice, a tribunal to protect and to ensure due process for those who are detained under the state of emergency regulations, detained and taken to detention centers, to make their case to a 3-panel tribunal. I saw the names of those who now form that panel. And then I saw the name of one individual, I believe it's a Mr. Kent Samlal. And then shortly thereafter, I saw a decision from the High Court last week during the same state of emergency, questioning and finding guilty of misfeasance in office, breach of fiduciary duties.
We need to quote it correctly. There was no cause of action for misfeasance in public office. So I'm not going to stop you from referring to the judgment. But if you're going to refer to the judgment, for the sake of the accuracy of the public record, I think you need to cite the cause of action properly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I know Mr. Speaker has some understanding of the matter. Breach of Section 99 of the Companies Act, breach of your fiduciary duty as a company director. So that was what was found in the matter of live sport. A matter where persons lost lives, live sport. So these are the things that have us a little uneasy as we go forward with an extension for 3 months. I would hope that that matter can be easily rectified. As we go on, Mr. Speaker, and we look at the regulations, we must marry it. Look at it. Regulation 19, Mr. Speaker. And this is the regulation where a member of the defense force gets the powers of the police service under the state of emergency, in effect, for lay people's terms and understanding. You look above that, Regulation 18, the person driving or in control of any vehicle in motion on a road shall stop that vehicle on being required to do so by a police officer in uniform. I thought that was already the law. So again, in the same criticisms that we've heard in this very chamber before, where was the consideration in the drafting of these regulations that we now know by looking at it had to be a complete cut and paste? But we make no criticism of that here today because we're dealing with serious business. The business with the suspension of our rights. So, respectfully, another proposition I make is states of emergency, Mr. Speaker, as you would be aware, practitioner of constitutional law, are always or should always be temporary measures and should be only utilized and as absolute last resort. Temporary measures. I'm putting the population, cautioning here today. The Constitution allows first 3-month extension with a simple majority. It allows us to come back if the government deems it necessary on another motion at the expiry of 3 months for a second extension of 3 months on simple majority. But it says thereafter, you can only extend a state of emergency with a special majority. And I have to say, in the 3 months of this Parliament, today marks 3 months, we have seen the use of special majority. So the population, please be put on notice today. Please be put on notice today that a state of emergency should always only be a temporary measure to deal with something that is in exceptional circumstances. And interestingly, in Jamaica, they have been utilizing rolling states of emergency to deal with the same issue of crime. And the OAS, Mr. Speaker, through the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, and I'm quoting from them, the September 5th, 2024, the IACHR expresses concern over Jamaica's continued use of states of emergency. And this is very relevant to us as a marker here today, because it cannot be a government's crime plan to embark upon the use of states of emergency. And this is what they say. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights expresses concern over Jamaica's continued use of states of public emergencies, SOEs, and calls on the state to ensure that measures used to prevent and combat crime are implemented in accordance with international human rights standards. They go on to say, during an SOE, state of emergency, the government temporarily grants security forces additional powers, including warrantless searches, arrests, and detention. Exactly what we're dealing with here today. They go on. Thank you very much. They go on to say, and this is the OAS, the IACHR, the court and the commission have observed that to adopt such measures, states need to justify their reasonableness, necessity, and proportionality in the context of the emergency. So that's the test here today. The test for the extension is justify as reasonable, is necessary, and proportional in the context of the emergency. So if we're going to extend this for 3 months, how is it? Because up to now, we haven't seen the seizure of any rocket-propelled grenades. We haven't seen the seizure, unfortunately, and I hope it comes, of the serious assault weapons that we know exist in the hands of criminals and that the Attorney General referred to earlier. We need to see, these are going to be the test of the success of a state of emergency, the test of this state of emergency success. Population is going to come in. What has been seized? Because you're asking to suspend our constitutional rights. You're saying that you know and you've dealt with the criminal element inside. And interestingly, in today's Express newspaper, on page 38, kidnappings not random, Commissioner of Police, criminals leaked info, family gossip to gauge wealth. It says, and this is the Commissioner of Police it's referring to, today's Express. Although he said authorities have managed to dismantle the core of the criminal organization, Guevara noted that several smaller offshoots are still active and remain under investigation. He believes these remaining factions may be responsible. So the commissioner is saying we've disrupted and dismantled the core of the criminal organization. So if that has happened, why the need for the extension for 3 months? Why are we not hearing the use of the anti-gang law? So another test of the success of this state of emergency is going to be charges. Because you see, it's a temporary measure, so you disrupt. But let us see the charges utilizing the anti-gang legislation, because repeatedly here in this chamber this afternoon, as the justification for the calling of the state of emergency, we've heard of gang, and the word gang is used, and gangs coming together and coordinated attacks by more than one gang that before didn't talk to each other. Those are very, very serious allegations. We have no doubt, because we have no evidence to prove otherwise. But what we expect to see and what we need to hear this afternoon is how does this extension of the state of emergency deal? How does it fix? That's a word that is understood. How does it fix these ills? Because it's a temporary measure, or we hope that the state of emergency will be a temporary measure. Because it is very possible in the circumstances for there to be a rolling state of emergency by those on the other side. God forbid. So having not heard any level of detail for this extension, remarkably and coincidentally, I'm sure it's a coincidence, in yesterday's newspaper there came a barrage of reasons. So we see the serious allegation in the Sunday Express on the front page, Judge and DPP on prison hit list. And then on the page 4, shocking prison plot forced top cop to call for state of emergency, Judge and DPP on murder list. Very serious allegations. Those justify for sure. Well, not for sure. Those justify the calling of the state of emergency. But if you have disrupted what is going on in the prison, because that's what we've been told, what's the need for the extension? Are the persons on the outside that we were just told who are collaborating or taking instructions from those on the inside of the prison, have they been held? Have the weapons, have these serious and sophisticated explosives been found? How is the state of emergency going to help with that? Is it that they can just now go without their warrants and they're not any risk? Because we've seen the risk before of leaks from within the criminal justice system. Fine, but we need to see the results. We need to see the effects. We need to understand, Mr. Speaker, how this extension is going to deal with that. And as I say, the newspapers was littered all of a sudden with reasons for the calling. There was a very useful story on page 7 of the Sunday Express, where Professor Ramesh Diosaran and Mr. Garvin Hira laid out certain concerns that I think is worthwhile us in here and the population taking note of. Professor Diosaran said, he pointed to Guevaro's recent disclosure that an organized crime syndicate was plotting to wreak havoc in Trinidad and Tobago through assassinations, kidnappings, and robberies. The Osran said the public expected the state of emergency would lead to the capture of the masterminds behind the alleged plot. That's something we join with on this side, because if you're going to have a state of emergency suspending everyone's rights and constitutional rights, we too expect that it would lead to the capture of the masterminds behind the alleged plot. He goes on to say, hopefully the 231 priority offenders so far arrested include the lead instigators of the syndicate plot, he said. Charging the targeted plotters, really terrorists, would bring strong justification for the controversial state of emergency and ease public skepticism. And that's what we're calling for. We expect to see charges. These are not my words. These are Professor Ramesh Deosran's words. He says, charging the targeted plotters, really terrorists, would bring strong justification for the controversial state of emergency and ease public speculation. He goes on to say, Deosran said such warnings must now be matched with results. And we join with that. If you're going to extend the state of emergency for 3 months, and all it requires is a simple majority, so we on this side don't think for a moment that if the government intends to extend, they would not be able to extend. And we are not standing in the way. What we're asking for on behalf of those we represent is what are the reasons and how will the extension deal with perennial criminal activity? Because nothing new has been declared here. It has come together, a perfect storm. But what has happened? Nothing new. And that is the justification that must be given to the country, Mr. Speaker. We on this side trust the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and the intelligence reports and the reasons that they gave, but that's for the calling of the state of emergency. And as I conclude, Mr. Speaker, I want to just set out some concerns that the population and ourselves have. We've heard of numerous instances of criminality in the prison system, referring to reports, but we've also seen the Prison Officers Association response. Don't make them a scapegoat. We have concerns about the criminal justice system, as we've heard here today, the threat state, and how will a speeding up of that system take place? Because these people are incarcerated on remand. We made all of the attempts in the 10 years, brought the legislation, sometimes without the support. That is another concern. There has been an uptick in killings by the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service during the state emergency. We're not passing judgment on that, Mr. Speaker, as to whether they were justified or not. But it is a matter of concern. And I register at this stage a concern that we've seen now suddenly appear an attack on the Police Complaints Authority. Attack on the Police Complaints Authority. It is their job, the PCA's job, to investigate these instances. And that is an important fabric of a democratic society. We ask, where are the results? Have the criminal gang members been held? Have the serious arms been located? Where are the rocket launchers? The Commissioner of Police and I believe the Minister for Homeland Security said that the initial threat had been neutralized or eliminated, as I just read the Commissioner of Police saying in today's Express. If that is so, where are we going now with the extension of the state of emergency? The detaining is the easy part, because the state of emergency and the regulations make it very easy to detain somebody. But what we're seeing now, especially as we've heard mentioned time and time again, is gang-related. The charges. We look forward as citizens to the charges. So, Mr. Speaker, these are some of the things. And also, I repeat that a state of emergency should be a temporary measure. What happens after? Because it cannot be that we're keeping prisoners detained at Defense Force bases. As a temporary measure, I understand it, having served as a former Minister of National Security and also chairing the National Security Council as Prime Minister. But it must be a temporary measure. What happens next? We are not hearing a single word as to what happens next. It's not ideal. This is not something that should be encouraged, Mr. Speaker. No serious citizen believes that a state of emergency is going to fix crime. So today, I conclude by saying respectfully, Mr. Speaker, we should never normalize the callings of states of emergency. That is something that is very, very dangerous. As I said, after 9 years, we resisted on many occasions the calling of states of emergency. If one looks at open source, you would see the then leader of the opposition, now Prime Minister, on many occasions calling for it. But a state of emergency is something of last resort because there are enough laws on the books to deal with crime. So it really has to be exceptional circumstances that we've heard here today and over the last 10 days. But it must be a temporary measure. The government must take the lead in taking responsibility for the state of emergency. Stop throwing the poor Commissioner of Police in front of it. It was your decision to call a state of emergency. I'm sure the government will join us that they don't want, and they will seek to ensure there's no abuse of powers under the state of emergency. We will continue to trust the Commissioner of Police, the Chief of Defence Staff and Intelligence in what they bring to the table. But we look forward, Mr. Speaker, to seeing tangible results, especially charges being laid under the anti-gang legislation. And I end by saying a state of emergency must not be the government's crime plan. Thank you.